Everyone, if I could have your attention, we'll begin the program. Welcome, everyone. I am Eduardo Alfonso, Chair of the Bascom-Palmer Eye Institute. On behalf of all of us, members of the house that Ed and Victor built, we thank you for joining us to celebrate the life of Victor Curtin. Thank you, Mary Lou, Paul, Jane, and Gail for giving us the opportunity to celebrate Victor's life and for being here with us today. Your support of Victor meant much to us, as we thank you for having provided him the opportunity to share so much of his life with us and with the rest of the Institute as our mentor and friend. We know that many would have liked to express their appreciation of Victor's contributions. A few have been selected to perhaps highlight some of these. We will hear from each of you about the different parts of Victor's life and accomplishments. Victor has been honored on many occasions, but truthfully, it will never be enough. We have talked about his role as the man behind the scene and the moral compass of the Bascom-Palmer Eye Institute. He was the man behind the scenes and the confidant to Dr. Norton and every subsequent chairman at the Bascom-Palmer Eye Institute. He was also the moral compass to every graduate of the Bascom-Palmer Eye Institute who would always ponder, what did Victor do or would have done in a situation like this? I benefited enormously from discussing with Victor many troubling issues of the Bascom-Palmer Eye Institute, and his advice has always proven to be invaluable to me. In Dr. Norton's eulogy, given by Dr. Curtin in 1994, he gave all the credit for the success of the Bascom-Palmer Eye Institute to the chief. We all disagree with you, Victor. Even Dr. Norton disagreed. I referenced a letter that Ed Norton wrote to Victor Curtin, and it's dated January 11th, 1963. And if Patty Norton were here, which I think she's going to be soon, I think I would have asked her permission to read this letter. In that letter, Dr. Norton said, "Dear Vic, I am writing to thank you in a more formal way for the many contributions to the development of the department. I realize that many chores have fallen to you because of the administrative duties that I have assumed. You have accepted these with minimum of upset. The student teaching program, the eye bank red tape, resident detachment surgery, resident interviews, and the private patients you care for. The monies that you have spent to equip the building and to support our mission are deeply appreciated. You have made great sacrifices to earn these funds. I wish I could promise you that the next years will be easier." While I receive much credit, I better than anyone else know how much the school is indebted to you. Each new staff member at the Bascom-Palmer Eye Institute has an easier road because of those of us who have gone before. Signed, Edward W.D. Norton. Victor ended the eulogy to Dr. Norton that day, which was a rainy day, as we all remember, saying with a broken voice, which I had never heard him before, the following: "Dear Dr. Norton, if you're starting a new Bascom-Palmer Eye Institute in heaven, I would like to join you. I'm glad to hear that they are now together. And I am sure that they're so happy that I have just heard that they have been named the #1 Eye Institute in eternity." The only thing I beg of Victor is to please, when I go up there to interview, that he will accept me. We have a nice program put together, and we're going to have some reflections from members of the faculty, alumni, friends, staff, and the family. And I'd like to start by asking Dr. Richard Forster to come up and tell us about the early years of Victor. Vic?
Good afternoon. It's a special privilege for me to honor Victor Curtin and to celebrate his life. I look at this event as a celebration of his life. And it's a celebration of his devotion to his family, Mary Lou, Jane, Paul, Gail, Joy, unfortunately, the fifth child, Anne, predeceased Victor. It is especially appropriate because Victor Curtin was the guiding light for this institution. And on a personal note, I wouldn't be here without Victor Curtin. He was a friend, counsel, and brother to me. I'm going to discuss the early years of Dr. Curtin's life before he was a doctor. He was born in Lawrence, Massachusetts, grew up in the Lawrence-Methuen area of Massachusetts in September, on the 12th of September, 1925. So Victor had celebrated his 90th birthday. He was the son of Dr. and Mrs. Victor A. Curtin, his father a dentist, and he attended Phillips of Andover Academy for high school. Here we have pictures in the center of Victor when he was about 3, as best we know. On the left is his older sister, Jane. And on the right, Victor with his dad, touting a sailor hat here in his early years. We don't know the date of that. Dr. Curtin received his undergraduate degree from Harvard College. He then joined the U.S. Army Medical Corps and was stationed for about a year in Japan. Subsequently, he went to both dental and medical school. Not sure he had a degree in dentistry, but he trained as a dentist and then became a physician at Harvard Medical School, graduating in 1953. A major event occurred in his life when he married Mary Lou Scott on August 30th, 1952. And the Curtins celebrated their 63rd wedding anniversary this past August. This was during his 4th year of medical school. His best man, their best man, was Dr. John Gary, and I will divert for a moment for a little personal anecdote. John Gary was an obstetrician gynecologist in Beverly, Massachusetts. And it so happened when my first daughter was born in 1963, John Gary delivered her. And when we were leaving to come to the Public Health Service in Miami that next spring, John Gary asked me what we're going to be doing. And I said, I really don't know for sure, but I might go into ophthalmology. And he said, well, I have a very good friend who is, along with another doctor, is establishing a new eye institute in Miami. And so we came down here, and 50 years ago this year, I interviewed with Dr. Curtin. Now, for those of you that have had the privilege of training here, you know what that is. But I had an in. And when I met Victor the first time, Dr. Curtin, I said, how do you do, Dr. Curtin? I bring greetings from John Gary. And he said, have a seat here. And it was downhill from that point on. Victor served his internship at what was then called San Francisco City and County Hospital. and finished his residency in ophthalmology at Cornell University Medical College. And here we see a photo of the chair, John McLean, Ed Dunlop to the left, a pediatric ophthalmologist, and then Dr. Edward W.D. Norton to his right, and Victor Curtin above that. Dr. Curtin then served a fellowship in ophthalmic pathology and retinal diseases with Taylor Smith on the left at Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary, and at the AFIP with Lawrence Zimmerman. Victor and Ed Norton agreed on most things in life, particularly when it pertained to the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute. One day, shortly before Ed Norton's passing, he said to me, "You know, Dick, I didn't want to take you as a resident. but Victor insisted." And I thought that was kind of a neat passing the buck by Dr. Norton. And then, very recently, in the last 2 years, I was speaking to Mary Lou, and she said, "You know, Victor used to come home at night and tell us about the problems at the Eye Institute and how he and Ed came to conclusions and resolved the issues." He said, "But there was one issue that they never agreed upon. And that issue was whether to take you as a resident or not." And so I owe my presence here unquestionably to Victor Curtin. And I think we all have a bond. It's a bond of friendship. It's a bond of support for the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute. It was nurtured and sustained over the years by this joint venture of Norton and Curtin. And on a very personal note, even though I regarded Ed Norton almost as a father, I regard Victor as a brother. And we move on to the subsequent years. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Dr. John Flynn, who has flown in from New York. And John, here you go.
Can you hear me? I told you.
All right.
Okay.
You're always right.
That's right. Smart boy, this boy. Made his way in the world.
John, thank you.
Okay. With that, I think I'm supposed to cover the years that I know Victor from 1965 forward. And before I go into that, I want to say I haven't been back to the Institute for a couple of years, and I must say I was a little nervous about coming here this morning. And when I turned the corner down where you come to the parking lot, I saw that great big blue iris, #1 in the country, and I just said, I am going to the warmest welcome that I've had in years. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to concentrate too much on that, but on my personal observations of Victor. When you first meet Victor, for a decade or so, he's somewhat intimidating. He rarely smiles. He's a man of few words, and those few words were sort of like cast down from the Oracle of Delphi or something. Anyway, my first job here was, let's say, an extracurricular job, was interviewing residence applications. And I'll follow up on what Dick said. My name is Flynn, and in the early years, Flynn followed Curtin. And I must say, I met many today leaders in ophthalmology, even as I look at some of these faces, people who have survived the Victor Curtin interview. It's just as Dick said, tell me about yourself. And then this, he turned around to the curtain in the back of his room. And that, you'd be amazed. Why? Because Victor was the smartest evaluator of the human heart of our residents coming through. Victor literally nursed classes after classes of residents. Must have been hundreds and hundreds of residents going through those charts, reading those silly recommendation letters, you know, that have about as much meaning as, I hate to say what, but anyway. And the amount of effort he put in to shaping this residency and to shaping its ethics and to shaping its, this is the right way to do it and we're gonna do it, okay? That's Victor Curtin to me. I must say the first decade or maybe 2 decades, Mary Lou, because it was tough for me. I was not from the big time schools here. I came from a school in the Middle West. I came in 1965, and my team had had a terrible year in football. Okay? And as soon as Don Gass and Ed Norton found out I was from Notre Dame, they never let me forget it. Okay? And the one thing that Victor did, which I attributed to his fundamental gentlemanliness, was he never said a word about Notre Dame's football. And we enjoyed many years. I commiserated with him because the Boston Red Sox just did terrible. Okay, I want to change the subject now. How many in here remember or know about the Red Book? Raise your hands. The Red Book. Not many, okay. The Red Book was a scandal, but what it was to me was to prove Victor Curtin's moral courage and ability to see through a crisis. What it was a book of board questions that was available in his closet, and residents, before they took their oral exam, you know, we all lived in fear, really, of the oral exam, not so much the written exam, and studied it. So we were prepared for the exam that we were to take the next day or so. Anyway, that somehow got out, and the people, the ophthalmopoliticians that were in the ophthalmic hierarchy at the time, just raised a furor. And the worst thing they did was to get a lawyer. And as soon as the lawyer came into it, I was personally non grata with my ophthalmopolitician friends, and so was Doug Anderson. Nobody, is Doug here?
No, he's not.
Okay. Nobody is kinder and sweeter and more gentle-natured than Doug Anderson. And we were marginalized. We were asked to leave the room when anything that had anything to do with examinations came up, okay? The only thing that Victor was at the center of that, because that was a book that was accumulated in his possession. And the only thing that he ever said, Doug and I went to him one time before a board meeting and said, Vic, do you want us to go get the red book back. He just looked, didn't say anything. Yes, get the book back. We've never been able to because it's copyrighted. Those questions are all a property of the American Board of Ophthalmology. But I've never heard Victor say another word about that. And with time passed, and you know how people forget, and yeah, you were there then, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, there's one final, just a little bit. Have I gone over my time? I knew that was coming. Okay.
Rhetorical question.
Okay. Okay. I just want to say, as the years roll by and mortality claimed our other brothers, Ed and Lawton and Don, and each year, Victor and I would become closer and more friendly. And I appreciate it, and I really thought a great deal of it. I'm finally being accepted by that wry, avuncular New Englander. I'm finally being accepted as one of them. And it was something I appreciated, and in that period of time, which came to an end with Victor's end, I came to know a Victor Curtin, softer, more gentle, more what can I say, less judgmental, but that's not a good way to put it. It's Victor, let's say, opened his thought processes to me and I to him. Okay, Victor is gone. What can I say to bring back the memory of this man? I can think of no better words than the line from Hamlet. Good night, sweet prince, and may flights of angels guide thee to thy rest. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and we
Did
follow.
you hear me, Eddie?
No, that's okay.
I'll repeat it.
We follow with another John Clarkson, who will talk to us about Victor's contribution to education at Bascom Palmer and the many trainees that are grateful for him.
Thanks, Eddie, and Mary Lou, Jane, Paul, Gail, and Joy. On behalf of all of us, thank you for choosing this venue to allow us to honor your husband and father. Few individuals are given the opportunity in life to work with the real giants in their field. Every Bascom Palmer alumna who had the opportunity to work with Vic Curtin certainly understood the impact and understands today the impact and positive outcome of such an experience. I hate to mention it again, but once you have overcome the intimidation of the Curtin interview, and John, I must say, some of us were fortunate it didn't take us decades. Once you have overcome that and began to work with him on a daily basis, we all grew to understand that beneath his outward New England reticence was a genuine and boundless regard for every member of the Bascom Palmer faculty, not just the house staff, everyone who worked here, everyone who was a part of this organization. He was always there for us, no matter the problem, no matter who developed the problem, and always did all he could to help us resolve the problem. Now, some of you are completely unaware of the fact there was the Department of Ophthalmology worked in 2 operating rooms in South Wing 4 of Jackson Memorial Hospital. When I was a second-year resident, and this speaks to Victor's impatience and the way we did retinal detachment surgery at the time, I can remember trying to localize a retinal tear on one of Victor's cases. He's got his arms folded, he's standing over by the wall kicking it, which of course made it easier for me. But there's no question that his meticulous attention to detail helped me to become a better physician and retina specialist. As you've heard, but put it in different words, he was the wind beneath Dr. Norton's wings. The chief never made a decision, an important decision regarding the department, without Victor's advice. And I also recall that these decisions were never rushed. I think one of his phrases was to let it shake down a little bit before we came to a conclusion. As alumni, we all benefited from our experience with Dr. Curtin, not just with ophthalmology, but with interpersonal communication, ethical behavior, and appropriate decision-making. I dare say that each of us is a better physician than we might have believed possible because of his impact on our training. And as a result, it's likely that hundreds of thousands of patients have received better care. I close with 2 quotes. One is not attributable because it is so commonly used and they haven't been able to find the origin, but credit was mentioned by Eddie. And the first is, you can accomplish anything in life if you don't get hung up on who gets the credit. And that's what Dr. Norton, Dr. Curtin, and John, I'd say all of the founding 5 were about. And that's why we're standing here today. The second quote is from an early 20th century American poet, Muriel Strode. She said, "I will not follow where the path may lead, but I will go where there is no path and leave a trail." That is what happened here, folks, with Dr. Curtin, Dr. Norton, and the others. Thank you, Dr. Curtin.
Next, we'll have Dr. Stanley Chang, who will talk to us about how grateful so many of the retina specialists around the country are that Dr. Curtin was part of their lives.
Thanks very much, Eddie. And I apologize, I have to use notes. I have to learn from John how to speak without notes. I'd really like to thank Eddie and the faculty committee, Dick Forster and Harry, for giving me the opportunity to share a few comments about Victor Curtin on behalf of the retinal community. The Chief and Victor were responsible for training and mentoring many of today's leaders, not only in retina, but also as chairs of ophthalmology departments. They were most influential during a critical stage of our professional development. And after we left the Institute, they continued to be supportive, share their experience, advice, and wisdom with us. They were good friends that we always look forward to seeing at meetings and enjoying their company. We were a part of their extended family. In preparing this presentation about Victor, I'd like to just tell my own personal story about Victor's mentorship during my career, but also quote comments that I have solicited from other leaders in retina who have trained here and could not join us today. I've taken excerpts from the quotes, and I have printed out the full statements on paper. So anyone like to have a copy of all of them, you can get them up in front. I decided to subspecialize in retina during my second year of residency at Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary. And in those days, most of the residents chose to stay in Boston and work with Charles Scapins at the Retina Foundation. After completing a 6-week rotation with Taylor Smith, who's a prominent retinal surgeon at Mass Eye Near, I asked him what he thought of retina at Bascom Palmer. He replied they were doing some interesting things down in Miami and that would be worthwhile to consider going there. I asked him about whether he would make a call on my behalf, and of course, he called Vic Curtin. Later, I found out that Victor had been his fellow, and that's, I think, how I got accepted down here. Taylor and Victor were very similar. They were men of few words, succinct, direct, and no nonsense. They both had an interest in ocular pathology, and they were both outstanding retinal surgeons. After I arrived at Bascom Palmer, I found a stark contrast in the environment. Mass Eye Near was like the most recent Republican primary. A lot of smart individuals who were fiercely competitive. At Bascom Palmer, there was little politics, and surprisingly, everyone got along. It was possible to learn in both environments, but more enjoyable in this one. Mark Blumenkrantz, who just stepped down as the chair of Stanford's ophthalmology department and is past president of the Retina Society, commented, "Well, Dr. Norton had an uncanny ability to identify individuals of enormous talent and attract them to Bascom Palmer through his obvious warmth, penetrating intellect, and personal charisma. He always relied on Victor to vet those same potential recruits first. He knew that Victor was a shrewd judge of character and could identify individuals that were not only very bright and ambitious, but those that could work collaboratively as part of a team and counted on always to do the right thing, even when no one was watching. In that way, he ensured that the whole Bascom Palmer was greater than the sum of its parts." Gary Abrams, who's the former chief at the Kresge Eye Institute, said, "The chief drove the train and Victor was the fireman and the conductor." During my fellowship, Victor was the busiest and most experienced retinal surgeon, and when there were complicated retinal detachment cases, the faculty often asked Victor to take a look and give advice. Victor was a perfectionist when he did surgery, from the initial conjunctival incision to the placement of the buckle and finally the closure of the eye. We were fortunate to spend a lot of time with him because Dr. Norton was frequently traveling and limited the surgeries. I also would like to quote from Gary Abrams again. "Victor was one of the great scleral bucklers of all time. One thing I remember so well is that when the fellow or resident put in a suture, Victor would say, 'Pick with the tip of the needle and glide.' I still hear Victor say that every time I put in a scleral suture, and I have said it to more trainees than I care to remember." Victor was the program director and in charge of residency and fellowship training. When he interviewed, I'd say he had a formal behavior. You didn't know where you stood. Bill Mueller, who is former chair of Chicago and now at UIC in Chicago, said, "Victor certainly commanded attention and respect from residents and fellows. If one did not perform as he or she should, Victor was the person who would meet with you, and you didn't want that to happen. While a resident was always a little fearful of Victor, still you really couldn't find a more fair person and truly no one who was more interested in the well-being and best interests of the residents and fellows." Steve Charles, who's a really well-known vitreoretinal surgeon and one of the innovators in the field, said, "Dr. Norton accepted me to the BPEI residency early in my junior year at medical school. Victor was appointed as my senior medical school year advisor. He asked me where I was going to interview for residencies, and I twisted and turned in my chair. I was scared, but finally told him that Dr. Norton had accepted me. Once he heard this, he shifted gears without a hitch and was incredibly generous." That's the first time I heard that Steve Charles admitted that he would twitch and turn. When I became program director at Cornell, I asked him how Victor was able to choose great residents and he replied that he tried so many things but in the end, the group always was a normal distribution. Some good ones and bad ones with a large peak in the middle of good people. Victor will always be remembered for his integrity. Tom Auberg, who was chairman at Emory University, and Mark Blumenkrantz, and Jack Holman, who was chair at Weill Cornell, called him the conscience of the Eye Institute. Mark Johnson, who is currently head of retina in Michigan and is the current president of the Retina Society, said, "I remember Victor Curtin first and foremost as a man of unflinching honesty and compromising integrity." To quote Tom Auberg again, "It was very clear that Victor's opinion was the omnipotent force of all reputational issues at BPEI, a role he employed with studious, intense thought, and non-self-serving wisdom." Many of us who became chairs of ophthalmology departments often sought Victor's advice. I often sought advice from him about how to keep the dean from taking the departmental assets. Don D'Amico of Cornell, who's currently the chair at Weill Cornell, notes, "It was also great to be able to pick up the phone and just ask him what he would recommend regarding some complex situation or prospective faculty addition. He would always find the daylight, gently helping me see the way forward." Victor was always great fun to be with. Once he knew you, he demonstrated a wonderful sense of humor and loyalty. Don D'Amico told this story about his experience with Victor at the Aspen Retinal Society. "Vic and I skied together at the Aspen meeting for many years, and I can attest he was a fearless and talented skier who really enjoyed the most challenging mogul runs. You could positively see the beam in his eye in the clinic in mid-February when he would begin rather prematurely packing for Aspen. One year, Paul Curtin joined us for several days of skiing, at least until Paul's first snowboard lesson resulted in a cracked leg. I canceled my own lesson reservation and have never thought of snowboarding since." At another Aspen meeting, we were all ferociously arguing scleral buckling versus vitrectomy when Vic finally got up and said, "Say what you want, but don't forget that scleral buckling basically built the Bascom Palmer." We will all miss Victor greatly, and yet we are thankful for his friendship, his mentorship, and his warmth as a person. Don D'Amico said it best. "Yes, Vic, we needed something you always gave and that we will always need and cherish. A straight line, a firm anchor, a continued inner call to be our best. I tell every student that I was trained by you, but it's the unspoken, energetic, eternally beating piece of you in my heart that I hope they hear and feel." On this Father's Day weekend, we remembered and are lucky to have experienced the paternalism of Vic Curtin, who was so devoted to his students throughout his life. Thank you, Mary Lou, for being his partner in completing his mission. And to Paul, Jane, and Gail, and Joy, thank you for sharing your father with all of us, his extended family.
Next, we'll have Dr. Harry Flynn, who will be the voice of Victor's grateful patients.
Thank you, Eddie. It's a great privilege to participate in this celebration for Victor Curtin. We all have our special moments that we remember with Victor, whether it was skiing in Aspen or seeing patients together, but I'd like to tell you about my first meeting with Dr. Curtin. I was an applicant for a job here at Bascom Palmer, and I had been forewarned about the interview. And so I came in trying to be humble, honest, and straightforward. And when Victor asked me really complex questions, my answer was, "I like to play tennis." I knew all of his family played tennis. I said, I think we should get together to play tennis. And then when the questions got really complex, I said, I like to do retinal detachment surgery. And so then he said, well, you know, Dr. Flynn, we have enough scleral bucklers here at Bascom Palmer now, and we have enough people to do sort of vitrectomies. You know, we have enough retinal faculty. But I'd really like you to help George Blankenship with the diabetic studies, and I'd like you to take all those bad cases that come in on Friday afternoon. And my answer to Dr. Curtin was, if you give me a job here, I'll scrub the floors and paint the walls. And so that was 38 years ago, and it's been my great privilege to work with Victor so many years and to have his friendship and support during my career, especially during those early years when I think a lot of us had some deficiencies in self-confidence, and Victor helped us get stronger, get through those failed retinal detachment surgeries, coming down to see patients with us. So I'm going to get back to my topic and talk about Dr. Curtin's contribution to patients and grateful patients. He was the world-renowned retinal detachment surgeon who trained so many people. In the upper left photograph, you can see Dr. Curtin localizing the retinal break and proceeding to place sutures in the sclera. And you can see on the lower left, you can see that he's now letting the fellow do the surgery. And you can see in the background Shirley. And Shirley's saying, Dr. Curtin, stop futzing around letting the fellow do surgery. Do it yourself. So Victor takes over and finishes the surgery. Now, Victor and Lawton Smith were arguably the best teachers in the medical school. They were consistently here. They took pride in teaching medical students and in spending time with residents and fellows to be the best educators. And this in turn trickled down to patient care and benefit of patients. Likewise, he was the leading ocular pathologist, looking at everything from melanomas to lid lesions and training other pathologists, such as my friend John Cavender, who's here. And then it goes down to other places, again, for the benefit of patients across the world. During the late 70s and 80s, these three individuals were world-recognized leaders in retina. And again, so many trainees here, 4 decades of retinal surgeons and retinal specialists that were trained by these men. Now, Dr. Norton and Don Gash were always on the road. They were giving named lectures here, there, and everywhere, but Victor stayed home. He did the work. He was Mr. Consistency in taking care of patients. And I'd like to present part of a letter from one of his grateful patients who's here tonight, Joy Carr. Joy stated in this letter, I first met Dr. Curtin when I was in my 20s and diagnosed with retinal problems. In my early 30s, when the retina tore and I lost most of my vision, immediately in my right eye, he performed my first retinal surgery. In those years and with my problems and without many advances that have been made today, I feel confident that his saving my sight was not just a miracle, but was the work of the most incredible surgeon I could have had. After that time, we became, over the years, more than a doctor and patient, but friends, and stayed in touch, both with his monitoring of my sight into the years of his retirement. So this shows a picture of Joy with her horses and her colleagues in law. Joy is a very successful attorney, and her friends as you can see here in law. She was a past president of the Dade County Bar Association. I have to go back one slide if I could, Alex. So Joy went on to say that the measure of wealth for a person is not in dollars, but it's what he's contributed to the world and to other people. And she said, based on my knowledge and my interactions with Victor Curtin, he surely is one of the most wealthy men in the world. And I think all of us agree with that based on what he contributed to patients and to us as individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Now we'll hear how Victor was a giant in eye banking and pathology, and Sander Dubovy, who's the Victor Curtin Chair in Ophthalmology, will tell us about it.
Thanks very much. It's truly an honor to be able to speak here to you today. And John Flynn does need notes. Stanley needed some notes. I can't talk without slides, so I apologize. So I think that the Florida Line's ocular pathology laboratory and eye bank, and how Dr. Curtin developed this, is really a microcosm for what he did here at the Institute and how he lived his life. The eye bank started in 1962 when Dr. Curtin and Dr. Norton felt that corneal transplantation might be something that might become rather important. And they were right. They started in 62. And the interesting thing is they decided to do this with the Lions, and Dr. Curtin was the first medical director. And one might say, well, why was a retina specialist and an eye pathologist the director of the eye bank? And Drs. Norton and Curtin felt that why put the fox in charge of the hen house? Which was, why put a cornea specialist in charge when there might be some potential thought that there was some propriety? And that's the reason that we've done this for the last 50 years. Also, the eye bank provided cornea for transplantation, operated and funded the pathology laboratory, which winds up being very important because if it wasn't for this foresight, we wouldn't have an eye pathology laboratory. We have one of less than 10 pathology laboratories that are freestanding because of Dr. Curtin and Dr. Norton's thoughts about this. They provided tissue for research. It was a center of education. And what's very interesting, all the services were provided free of charge up until about 2005 or 2006 because of the close workings with the Florida Lions. And here you have Jimmy Nelson, who was the first president, and there were presidents every year that we dealt with. He always said to surround yourself with good people, and here are two of the best. One you've heard about is Miss Mary Lou Curtin on the left, his wife of over 60 years, and Pearl Goldberg on the right, who was the first executive director and served as executive director here and really started the eye bank, did all the workings of it for over 20 years. But it wasn't just Pearl. He then brought in Mary Ann Taylor and Elizabeth Fout-Carrazza. And what you see here is all of the executive directors of the Florida Lions Eye Bank, 3 in 54 years. And that's because he found good people, treated them well, and they did wonderful things for him because of him. The ocular pathology laboratory was similar. Started with one technician, Manuel Solis, who I think might be here. He's still a patient of mine. Yes. Manuel, it's good to see you, Manuel. And you can see Manuel in the bottom right here. And Manuel is actually still a patient of mine. I don't want to break any HIPAA violations, so I get to talk to him on a semi-regular basis. And there's Blanca Montero, Cynthia Maza, Magdalena Rivas, and this is the technicians we've had for the 54 years. So in the first, and so this is the original laboratory across the street, and then the laboratory moved here. You can see some people here. This is actually Kathy Corser's younger daughter, right, Kathy? And here's Manuel, and here is Alina Hackworth. So the people are here. This was back in the 80s. Now, here are the 3 medical directors, and we're wearing the requisite eye pathologist outfit, which includes glasses, a tie, and a pen in your pocket. But when I got here, this is a picture right when I got here. I came here from London, and I had heard a lot about Victor Curtin, and I was quite honestly a little scared. So I called Dick Green, who was my mentor up at Hopkins, and I said, what can you tell me about Dr. Curtin? And actually he said to me, he said, Vic Curtin is a prince. And that has been my dealings with him throughout my time here at Bascom Palmer. He was a wonderful person to follow. I mean, walking in behind him could have been very difficult, but he was always very humble, unassuming, and very helpful. And for that, I will always be very, very thankful. What's his legacy with the eye bank? Well, there is, as I said, all the materials were provided free of charge for many, many years. And over 60,000 corneas were transplanted, which gave people the gift of sight. Pathology specimen, over 101,000 cases have been signed out from the beginning till today. And the total patients served is about 160,000 patients. And that is really what he's done for people here. You've also heard he was very much involved in medical student and resident teaching. He taught direct ophthalmoscopy to all the medical students. He taught indirect ophthalmoscopy to all of the residents. And he taught ophthalmic pathology to all of the residents and fellows. But this didn't stop when he retired. In 1996, he retired, but he continued to come into the laboratory. This is him during residence orientation with Charlie Wyckoff here and some of the other residents. He would come in and work with them. And he used to get one section of every slide up until about 5-6 years ago, and he'd look at all the cases and discuss them with me. He was a wonderful person to have here, especially when I was a department of one. In 1991, the Victor T. Curtin Professorship in Experimental Ophthalmic Pathology was funded. And here you see members of the cornea service, some relatively younger looking members of the cornea faculty. It's a great picture, and this was founded in part by the Lions in the eye bank. And that's a great picture, but this one I think is better. And you see Dr. Curtin, who really had a wonderful, dry New England sense of humor. You see him kicking back, lying back in the chair, and I got to know him as a person with a very, very good sense of humor who I really enjoyed chatting with. The highlight of my academic career was about 1.5 years ago here, was being invested as the Victor T. Curtin Chair in Ophthalmology. And it meant a lot to me because A, it was an endowed chair, but more importantly, that I got this and it was named after Victor Curtin. And I'm actually quoting myself, which is really quoting Dr. Curtin, and I was talking about how it was difficult for my family because I spent a lot of time here at the Institute, just as it was very difficult for Dr. Curtin and Dr. Curtin's family here. And what I said was to my kids was, I said, hopefully, if you understand that with hard work, humility, and dedication, one can accomplish a great deal, and that was a lesson taught to me by Victor T. Curtin. So in summary, what is the legacy of Victor Curtin here at the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute? I think a lot of this is that he established things a little like George Washington. There was growth during his tenure, but even more importantly, there's continued growth after his retirement because he put the institution above himself. There was true modesty. He served as a caretaker, grew things, and then let things move on. And I think that's a lesson that we can all learn here at the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute. We're caretakers, we do the best we can with things, and hopefully we leave it to the next group and they can do an even better job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sander. For many of us, there was no Victor Curtin around unless there was a Kathy Corser too. And I've asked Kathy to say a few words of what it was like to work next to Victor Curtin for so many years. Kathy?
Hello, everyone. Having had the privilege of working with Dr. Curtin for over 40 years, I am honored to have been asked to say a few words about him. I did not interview with Dr. Curtin. One afternoon in 1974, he walked past my office. I was working with Don Gass and Margaret Bertolami, and he just looked at me and said, "My secretary doesn't want me anymore, so I guess I'll see you on Monday." I said, "Okay, I'm not sure how this happened, but evidently my mother, who was Lawton Smith's secretary, and Gabby Cresley had been involved in deciding that I would work with Dr. Curtin. So thanks, Gabby. Appreciate that. I did not have to interview with him, as I say, and I am thankful for that, because every day when we would be interviewing, the door would shut and I would hear that line, "Tell me a little bit about yourself." Okay, and we all have that recurring theme, I hear. He was a quiet, unassuming, a humble mentor. I knew that I could take any problem to him and he would guide me. He was a voice of reason and never failed to be fair in his solution, so much so that other employees would come to me and I would take their concerns to him. I always felt that Dr. Curtin reinforced the lessons that I learned from my parents about honesty and ethics. Every Christmas, we would get together in the library and have a potluck lunch with all the staff. Dr. Curtin would supply the fresh, peeled jumbo shrimp. We had a great time. We had a tight family 40 plus years ago. We had Reva and Gabby and Yvonne and Jean and Pearl, Drs. Curtin, Norton, Smith, Gass, John Flynn, Forster, Anderson, Glazer, Jean-Marie Perel, and so many, many other colleagues. We moved the Path Lab, the eye bank, and our offices from the McKnight building to the eye hospital in 1983 in a much more modern digs, and it was really nice. As you may know, Dr. Curtin had that New England demeanor, what seemed like a dry sense of humor, but I sure can still hear him chuckling to this day over something that amused him. He liked that chuckle. It was cute, special. He loved his New Yorker magazine, and a few times would even forget to get off Metro Rail, go past the stop, turn around, and come back while he was reading. He even told me one day that he walked into a sign when he was walking from the train station to the Institute. I believe it. So I am fortunate to have had the best of the best to work with, and more than proud to say that Dr. Curtin was one of my longest running friends. I've worked with him more years than I lived with my parents, more years than I've been married, and I sure do miss him.
Next, we'll hear from Jane and Paul Curtin.
Good evening, everybody. And while we're getting the slides together, I just wanted to say one of my observations is that we are all talking about the same man here tonight. So I'm Jane Curtin, Victor Curtin's eldest daughter, and I'm just going to get my mouse together here. And it's my honor to have an opportunity to share some personal thoughts about my father before this esteemed group of physicians, family, and friends. How's the volume? Is the volume okay? Okay, great, thank you. On behalf of my family, my mother, Mary Lou, my brother, Paul, my sisters, Gail and Joy, I would like to thank everyone in attendance today for taking this interest in my father. I would, of course, particularly like to thank Bascom Palmer and the organizers of this memorial service for the thought and effort involved in putting it together, including Dr. Alfonso, Dr. Forster, Dr. Dubovy, Drs. John and Harry Flynn, and my father's resourceful and beloved former administrative assistant, Kathy Corser. I would like to thank each of the speakers at today's service for sharing their experiences with my father, including, in addition to the aforementioned group, Dr. Clarkson and Dr. Chang. The history, stories, and anecdotes were informative, touching, and humorous, and very meaningful to my family and myself. In addition, I would also like to say thank you to Joy Carr for the beautiful letter she wrote on behalf of my father, and for the extraordinary generosity in underwriting the lovely reception to follow. In thinking about what I might like to say to this august group on this occasion, a few key themes presented themselves. One was the extent to which Bascom Palmer, obviously, was my father's home away from home, or perhaps more accurately, the place where my father felt most at home. I can't think of a single day when my father wasn't happy to get up and go to work, something quite remarkable in a career that spanned over 5 decades here at Bascom Palmer. I believe this was because it was so deeply fulfilling on both personal and professional levels to be instrumental in the formation of this extraordinary eye hospital and in shaping its course over so many years to come. The talks we've heard today make it even clearer why this would be so. I forgot to change my slides. Let's see. Here we go. No. There we are. This was my father being happy to come to work every day. Okay, we'll continue from here. My father and Dr. Norton were a formidable team, really a professional match made in heaven. While their temperaments and strengths differed, they complemented each other perfectly and were a great combination to found a new institution. Dr. Norton, with his inspired vision, his quest for excellence, and insightful people skills, and my father with his analytic mind, relentless drive to solve problems, social commitment, and simple willingness to work hard. The two men, despite their differences, recognized kindred spirits in each other and built a lifelong relationship built on mutual trust, respect, intellectual exchange, and pleasure in each other's company. Listening to the presentations today, it's easy to understand why the enterprise of Bascom Palmer was so compelling and all-consuming for my father. I must add that it is also breathtaking to see the glorious institution that has evolved from those early days of labor, as well as the talents and contributions of so many others in the years that followed. Those of you who knew my father during his final years are aware that he suffered a significant cognitive decline during this period. So for his family, close colleagues, and friends, the loss came in 2 stages. The first to a slowly progressing dementia, possibly a somewhat atypical course of Alzheimer's disease, and the second to his actual death in March of this year. The dementia, whether related or unrelated, followed a rather mysterious neurological illness, never fully diagnosed or understood, that occurred in the summer of 2010 and significantly impacted my father's ability to move his lower limbs. While we later recovered approximately 60 to 70% of his mobility, he never regained his prior level of functioning, and his cognitive decline became evident soon thereafter. This loss of intellectual capacity in my father was, of course, a major blow to both my father and mother. While we are all familiar with the statistics indicating the high incidence of dementia and Alzheimer's disease in older adults, it was hard to see it coming in an individual whose identity was so defined by his keen cognitive functioning. I recall a telephone conversation with him during the early stages, where he attempted to describe what he was experiencing. He said in a slow and halting fashion, "It's like there are gaps or holes in my thinking and speech. I start a sentence, but I can't finish it. I can't find the words. I can't fix the holes." My mother had the foresight at this time to recognize that they would soon need greater support in their daily lives and began exploring living options for their final years together. She identified East Ridge at Cutler Bay as a resource that met many of their needs and proposed a move to this senior living community. It will not surprise those of you who knew my father that he was rather resistive to this idea, representing, as it did, new limitations on his independence and freedom. But what also became clear was that the further geographical distance from Bascom Palmer symbolized a painful separation from a place he loved, where he felt deeply at home and truly free to be himself. In a moment of frustration between my parents as they tried to resolve this conflict, my mother asked my father, "Victor, what is it that you want?" And the answer came, Bascom Palmer. Those in charge at Bascom Palmer during the final decade of my father's life graciously allowed him to visit on a regular basis and clearly went out of their way to make him feel welcome and at home when his progressive cognitive limitations precluded truly meaningful contributions to its daily operations. Our family is grateful to Bascom Palmer's administrative leadership, faculty, and staff for this human kindness, as it truly eased my father's suffering during his final years. He would return from these visits happy and fulfilled and report to us that he had a very productive day. While the progressive dementia drastically changed the quality of my father's life, positive aspects of his character and values shone through and even moved into the foreground. I would like to briefly touch on a few of these qualities as they express themselves before and after the onset of the dementia. His commitment to social justice, his sense of humor, and the love he felt for and inspired in many who were close to him. One of the accomplishments of which my father was proudest and recounted in his final years was the refurbishing of the inpatient wing in Jackson Memorial Hospital, designated to house indigent eye patients during the 1960s. The building was both segregated and in terrible disrepair. My father initiated and oversaw major renovations that resulted in comfortable and functional overnight facilities and eliminated the segregated water fountains and bathrooms. What I learned recently, however, was that my father utilized funds from his own earnings to accomplish this task. This, while he was supporting a wife and 4 young children and renting an unair-conditioned house in a middle-income section of Miami. I have always been deeply touched by this admirable quality in my father. It has its roots in his upbringing. His father was a dentist, as you've heard, in Methuen, Massachusetts, who set aside each Wednesday to visit the local orphanage, to take care of the children's teeth without charge, and who treated war veterans for free on a lifelong basis. Related to this point is a poignant memory I have of a conversation with my father during my high school years. In a voice laden with emotion, my father said, "I used to believe that the gap between the haves and the have-nots would close in my lifetime. But I see now that that is not going to happen, and I am gravely disappointed." I would like to think that, albeit in much smaller and less grand ways, both my brother Paul and I carry on this Curtin legacy in our work. Paul is the director of a nonprofit junior development tennis program operating through the Prospect Park Alliance in Brooklyn, New York, and myself as the program director of a special education preschool serving children with autism and other developmental disorders through a nonprofit human service organization with chapters across New York State. As an aside, it could be said that Paul took my father's play, or favorite form of recreation, and made it his life's work. Tennis, that is, of course, currently making it accessible to hundreds of children each year across a wide swath of economic backgrounds. And I probably took the dimension of my father's personality that he was least comfortable articulating and exploring, reserved New Englander and man of Irish heritage that he was, as we've heard many times today, the realm of feelings and emotional development, and made it my life's work, returning to school in my 30s to pursue a doctorate in clinical psychology. As I recall, while always supportive of further education, my father asked me at the time, "Jane, why would you want to go into that field? It's all gray area and murkiness with nothing concrete to hold on to." While emotional openness and interpersonal relatedness were not my father's strong suit, as we have heard many times in the reports of the residents who sat through those challenging interviews with my father, a strong and sometimes acerbic sense of humor was definitely one of his saving graces, and a quality that persisted straight through to the end. I have 2 quick anecdotes from his final days that I would like to share in this regard. One occurred in a rehabilitation facility where a speech therapist was assessing his safety awareness, was assessing his facial was assessing, I'm sorry, I got distracted by my pictures, his safety awareness and his level of common sense understanding. She showed him a picture of a woman about to wash a cake mixer under running water in a sink, while it was still plugged into an electrical socket. She asked him, "Is this good?" He looked at the picture, nodded his head, and said slowly, "Mm-hmm, very nice, very nice." But as she removed the picture, a look of dismay crossing her face, he quipped, "If you want to die." The second anecdote took place on his final day in Baptist Hospital, following what proved to be an irreversible and fatal course of sepsis. A young attending physician, newly assigned to his case, introduced himself and said in a friendly fashion, "I read that you were associated with Bascom Palmer. I'd like to get LASIK surgery done on my eyes there. Can you recommend a doctor?" Without missing a beat, my father nodded his head, smiled slyly, and said, "I'll do it." Thank you. To this day, I find it a mystery how dementia can rob a person of so many critical faculties and yet leave pockets of intellectual sharpness, such as expressions of humor like this. While the dementia was brutal in many of its effects on my father, increasing his isolation and decreasing his capacity to read, think, remember, converse, and generally engage with the world around him, it nonetheless also brought out a number of touching and poignant qualities in his personality, such as what Dr. Flynn referenced. His honesty remained, but it was filtered through a reliance on others that he would never have permitted himself in earlier times. This resulted in a touching vulnerability that often moved me deeply. One such moment occurred when my father communicated to me that he was afraid he might outlive my mother. He stated that he desperately hoped that would not happen, as he did not believe he could live without her. My father's love and devotion to my mother was deep and abiding. As children, we quickly learned there was no playing him off against her, as children are wont to do to achieve their own ends. My mother clearly came first in his relationship priorities, followed by his children. But it was a significant role reversal for both of them when, during the last years of their lives together, my mother had to take charge and make all the key decisions. He trusted her to look after both of their interests, but neither of them rested easily with this new world order. It was during moments of gentleness that I found my father easiest to love. One such moment occurred during my college years upon the death of my maternal grandmother, Grace Scott. Riding in the back of the limousine on the way to the service, tears began streaming silently down my face. I felt embarrassed that I appeared to be the only one crying, since others were closer to my grandmother and suffering greater loss. My father turned around and saw my face. His eyes registered a look of surprise, and he said gently, "Jane, these things are never easy." I thought of this moment many times during his final days in the hospital and in home hospice. On one of those days, and a particularly rough one I might add, as the doctors attempted to stabilize his functioning in the throes of multi-organ failure, I found myself alone with my father for a few hours while he was in a disoriented state. Upon seeing me, he assumed I had come to take him home from the hospital. He quizzed me about where the car was parked and asked me to help him out of bed. I explained to him that he was not well enough to leave, that I was there to visit with him, not take him home. However, he did not grasp or accept my message. Over the next couple of hours, he grew increasingly agitated and angry with me, not understanding why I was not helping him. I asked the hospital staff for support, but they merely advised me to remain present and persevere in my attempts to calm him down. After a couple of hours locked in this unrelenting struggle, I once again found silent tears streaming down my face. I thought to myself, "You're absolutely right, Dad. These things are not easy." When he saw my face this time and registered the tears, I saw that same look of surprise from years ago cross his face. Only this time he changed tacks and said, "Okay, if you won't do it, Call Kathy. Kathy will help. She'll do it. Call Kathy. 305-326-635. And this remain the refrain for the remainder of the day and into the evening. So Kathy, as I'm sure you know, you got him exactly right and forged an amazing personal and professional alliance that was deeply appreciated and respected by my family. And we thank you for that. I missed the picture of Kathy. There's the picture of Kathy. Missed my punchline there. In closing, I would also like to thank the members of our extended family who are here today and have supported us through this sad period, including my life partner of over 18 years, psychoanalyst Dr. Robert Katz, my brother's partner, Mary Gilmore Kirkpatrick, also a DOD, daughter of doctor, as a friend of mine likes to call it, whose mother and father were both physicians affiliated with the University of Miami, and whose father, Dr. Hugh Gilmore, is here with us today, along with her brother, Hugh IV. And my sister Joy's husband, Matthew Tompkins. My family and I appreciate your presence here today and your support. I would also like to mention extended family members who are here with us in spirit, but whom we've lost, including my sister Anne, my father's sister and my namesake, Jane Curtin Halco, and her husband Henry, who, although still with us, is not well enough to travel from Boston to be here, and my mother's sister, Elaine, and her husband, Hans Landesman. So on this Friday preceding Father's Day weekend, I thank you for giving me this opportunity to share reflections on my father and experiences from the final chapter of his life. Thank you for celebrating his life and accomplishments with this beautiful memorial service and reception.
Paul, you get to hit the slam.
I think I'm going to dispense with the microphone with John Flynn. Can you hear me back there? Okay, wonderful. My name is Paul Curtin, and I'm Vic Curtin's son, and that's a very tough act to follow. So I know many of you have been here since 7:30 this morning. I thank you for sticking it out. There's some complimentary Preparation H available in the lobby. Oh, it's really heartwarming to hear these remarkable tributes, these articulate descriptions of my father and his career and his time at the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute. It's wonderful to see people that I haven't seen in decades. I remember as a bit younger coming to the house on the occasional party that my mom and dad would throw on Saturday nights for the residents and fellows. And it's great to see some young doctors I've not met, but it's wonderful to have you here in attendance. So thank you for letting me speak. I feel a little bit like I'm at the Academy Awards and the orchestra is starting to play. So I'm going to make this fairly short and sweet, as low-tech as it comes, practically Stone Age. No more slides for me. One thing I'd like to start with, my sister Gail made a great point a couple of days ago and said to me, you know, we ought to mention Dr. Norm Schatz, a career-long colleague and friend of my father's, and specifically thank him for helping us in recent weeks, the last couple of months, especially with my mom and her recovery. So he's just been wonderful and really helped things along. Speaking of mom, my father would be absolutely incensed if a description of his career were presented without putting her front and center, which my sister did so well. I would just say that 50 years ago, and worlds away, with a brood of 5 children, she held down the fort allowing him to work a typical 65-hour work week. I'd also like to thank the late Dr. Edward W.D. Norton, the founding father, really the George Washington of the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute. He was the man my father most admired. I'd also like to thank the late Mary Norton and the entire Norton clan who made us feel welcome in the early Miami years. One of the perks of having your dad work at the Florida Lions Eye Bank Hospital is that about once a year, you could bring an eyeball to school for the science project show and tell. A human eye, of course, not a cow's eye or something like that, the real deal. My third grade classmates thought this was incredibly cool, except for the few who fainted. A couple of teachers also had to leave the class complaining of queasiness. Sander, do your kids still get to do this?
Same outcome.
Okay. Good. Love is not a word my dad used often or easily, but it accurately describes the affection he felt for this eye institute. Not only the faculty, fellows, residents, and medical students, but the technicians, the nurses aides, the administrative assistants, and the people who maintain the buildings. He was keenly aware of their presence, how hard they worked, and how they helped the place run smoothly. My father was fortunate enough to live long enough to see his dreams realized. In retirement, he cut back to a 5-day work week. Many people's work goes underappreciated, sometimes unrecognized. For me and my family, it has been so gratifying to observe the return, the gratitude, and the love, he's wincing right now if you heard me say that he has received from all the people who've worked here. Thank you, Chief Alfonso, for making his retirement meaningful. You've taken care of the things large and small. He relished participating in the committee meetings, his involvement with the situations and the history. It really added a great deal to his final years. As some of you probably know, he attended weekly grand rounds until 2010. This sort of brings the circle of love to a complete conclusion. And I'd like to close with a brief quotation from John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And in the end, love you take is equal to the love you make. Now let's get out of here and raise a glass to Victor Thomas Curtin.
As we conclude at least this part of the celebration of Victor's life, I'd like to, on behalf of the faculty and the staff of the Bascom Palmer who loved and respected Victor Curtin, like to extend our deepest appreciation and gratitude to Joy Maxwell. She has made a gracious donation so that we can celebrate Victor's life with a glass of wine downstairs, and all the contributions he made to patient care and will continue to make for years to come. We invite the Curtin family, all friends here, and all of you to come down to the lower level so we can continue that celebration. We will have an ongoing slideshow down there with videos of Victor so we can continue to share memories, and we will also have the video played here when we celebrated Victor's tremendous contributions to the residency program 2 years ago when he was honored at the 50th celebration of Residence Day. And we did a video with Victor, and so you'll get a chance to hear some of his thoughts on how he put together the Bascom-Palmer Eye Institute with Ed Norton. So thank you everyone for being here, and continue to cherish Victor's life. Thank you.